Before we begin today's podcast, I wanted to answer the most emailed question that pops up in my inbox. Neil, how do you earn your living outside of this daily tech podcast? Well, seeing as you ask, if you're starting 2021 and have a long list of goals for the new year, but a lack of time to bring them to life, remember, you can work one-to-one with me in a number of areas. For example, if you want to hit record on a conversation in Zoom or Microsoft Teams, I can edit those files and help you launch your own podcast and help you have a show like this on Spotify, Apple Podcasts and all the usual platforms. Equally, if your leadership team needs help with ghostwritten thought leadership articles, or you need someone to manage the content for your business blogs, pop by my website, techblogwriter.co.uk, where you'll find more information on how you can work with me. And you'll also find links to 1,500 interviews on the Tech Talks Daily podcast, plus my shows with Netgear and Citrix. But enough from me, on with today's show.
Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. We have officially made it through. Happy New Year, gang. Tell me, did you have a t-shirt made of I Survived 2020? And as we've ushered out let's face it, a crappy year, we now need to collectively harness that positivity and feeling of endless opportunity that only seems to come at the beginning of a new year. And confession time, I for one have had a diet of too much food, drink and bad TV, and I feel like I don't want to eat a thing for at least a week. So, predictably, I want to improve my diet, try to move a little more, and hit the road going for a run again. And this got me thinking, how has technology changed the way in which we view food and how it impacts our mental alertness, mindset, and indeed overall health? So, Tracy Stuckrath is an event planner and international speaker with food allergies, and based in New Bern, North Carolina. She launched Thrive Meetings and Events back in 2010, changing the trajectory of her event planning career to try and educate organisations on how to feed attendees with their unique dietary needs. And she's authored not one but two books, Humans at Work and You at Work, and is currently working on her third book, Eating at a Meeting, and has also been named in the top 25 women in the meetings industry changemaker, and also one of the top 500 event professionals in the whole of North America, all for her work on the topic of inclusive food and beverage. And as you all know, I'm passionate about exploring every industry and the impacts that technology is having on it. So food, drink, well-being, I'm intrigued how technology fits into all that too. So buckle up, hold on tight, because I'm going to beam your ears all the way to North Carolina so we can speak with Tracy Stuckrath right now. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Tracy. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Hey, Neil, thanks for having me. Yeah, I am an international speaker and I'm an event planner. And I've been an event planner for 30 years now, holy moly. And I've been a speaker for 10. And I speak and train and mentor and coach on how, my fun way to say this, on how not to offend or kill people with the food that you serve them. And so and I should say I'm a podcaster too. I'm not just an event planner and a speaker. I'm a podcaster as well. So,
man, you picked the right time of year to come on here, especially when a lot of people are going around to other people's houses and try not to be offended or killed by other people's food. But on this podcast, I am fascinated by what put people on their path to success. I've got to ask, where did your passion for live events and food experiences that are safe and inclusive for everyone actually come from? And what was it that made these two worlds collide?
So my first, this is kind of funny, but when I was in college back in 1990, one of my internships was for the health center at the university. And I actually had to plan Condom Awareness Week. On campus, which was, just my boss bought me a condom, a big condom to put on my head and wear around campus. But I just the events are wonderful. We've been hit hard right now because of the COVID pandemic. But when I got diagnosed in 2003 with a food allergy, I was also a corporate planner who was producing 100 events a year, and I couldn't eat in any of them because I didn't know what was in the food. People struggled with trying to feed me gluten-free, dairy-free, yeast-free. They were like, what do I feed this woman? Right. So in 2010, I started my company Thrive. I left corporate America and started my company. And so for 10 years now, I've been educating people on how to provide safe and inclusive food and beverage experiences. And it really, I think at the very beginning, it wasn't even that. It was how to make the world healthier one event at a time. And as I've met individuals who utilize wheelchairs or scooters, their access to the food and beverage impacts them having a great experience at the table. When I first started, it was all about dietary restrictions and food allergies and celiac and all that. And it still is that, but it actually is so much more than what we're feeding them. And it's how we're feeding them, and how when you and I sit down to a table together and you have your plate and 30 minutes later, I still don't have mine because they didn't accommodate me. So it adds so much more to that conversation around food and beverage.
And one of the things people always ask me on this podcast is, so you've interviewed over 1,400 people. What do they all have in common from their success stories? And I've always said that it's a big case of serendipity, really. It's those happy accidents. And just looking at your own story there of live events, the food allergy, food experiences, and Condom Awareness Week, you would never put them all into one big melting pot, would you?
No, probably not. And I've worked corporate America. I've planned fundraisers, golf tournaments. I've worked on 2 Olympic Games. So my event experience is very vast. And, and I had food issues when I worked one of the Olympics. They are like, oh, sorry, anybody who has dietary needs. They're like, your lunch and breakfast for the next 21 days is lentils and rice or curried chickpeas. I'm like, you want to feed me beans for 21 days straight? Like, that is not a good thing for anyone. But so it really does add a variety to what I do. And the pandemic helped me launch this podcast, or my podcast, not this one. And it's been a lot of fun interviewing people in all aspects of food and beverage, because I think that we all need to know more about the food that we eat and where it comes from and how it interacts and affects us personally and, globally, as well as the earth. So it's been a great learning experience, and in so many ways.
I love the journey that you've been on here. And here in 2021, we finally made it. But can you tell me a little bit more about the kind of problems that you're solving and the kind of businesses or events that you're helping right now?
Yeah. So I am actually 2021. I have also launched, or I'm launching, a course called Every Meal Matters. And with my speaking and with this course, I help meeting organizers of all sorts of kind understand, why does every meal matter? We've got disability legalities around it, how it provides inclusion or actually excludes people if we don't pay attention to it. But what are food allergies? What are dietary restrictions, medical dietary needs? What are religious-based practices? And then it walks you through where does food and beverage fall into your event? Because think about when you go into a hotel or a convention center, there's food in the exhibit hall, there's food in the sundry shop, there's food in the restaurant, there's food in your meetings, there's food in the little refrigerator in your room. It's all around us, and it's something that we all need to do or eat food. So what I do is I teach you to think about where food and beverage is in your events and meetings and how it impacts your attendees so that you can create a more inclusive environment. You can welcome more people. You can boost your bottom line because, Neil, if you and I went out to dinner, with a couple of our friends, you're probably going to pick the restaurant that meets the need of the person who has dietary needs more so than you are going to pick anyone else because everyone else can eat everywhere. So it's really focusing on how to improve your inclusion and productivity and boost your bottom line.
Love that. And as a man of a certain age, I do remember when we didn't really understand how food affected us. But now I look around and so many people are scanning and documenting everything that they eat in a variety of health apps. But how have you seen attitudes change? And I'm also curious how you've seen technology help people better manage their diet as well. Is that something that you've seen a lot of over the years?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I have an app on my phone called Lose It. That helps you track your iron and your calories and things like that. Noom is another one that's just, one of those apps. But within the meetings industry, or not within the meetings industry, but within the hospitality industry, there's a couple of different companies that I've chatted with. Certistar is an app and a program for restaurants that actually they come in and they will work with the restaurants to code every single one of their menus and their recipes so that when you come in, you can say, hey, I need this. And they're like, oh, pull up our menu on our app on Certistar, and you can see exactly what you can and cannot eat on our menu. And Shandy, who designed it, has got food allergies herself. And she told me that she used to go into restaurants 30 minutes to an hour before a business meeting to talk to the chefs as well as the servers to say, hey, I have these allergies. I don't want to go through this issue when I'm sitting down with my clients or my potential new boss. I want to have the decisions already made. And so when I come back in an hour, I don't want you to fuss over it, because she found out that it's 15 minutes of a discussion to find something on the meal, and you don't want that to take up with your business time. So her program actually helps restaurants create better experiences for their customers. And then my friend Dave Bloom, he's got a website called Snack Safely, and he has partnered with manufacturers. They actually are able to list their products on his website as long as they disclose all of the allergens that are in their products. So, and he creates these Snack Safely guides. And so you can download the gluten-free guide or the milk and gluten-free guide, and you can actually search and create your own guides as well. And it's a great resource to find products that meet your needs based on, he tracks, I think, 11 different foods that are considered allergens. And then you can mix and match. And he also has kosher on there. And I think he also maybe tags it for vegan and vegetarian as well. So it's really, those two products, I think, are great resources for people who have dietary restrictions.
And I think there will always be, there'll also be a lot of people listening, with it being New Year's Day, or they'll be thinking, new year, new me. They'll be wanting to visit their diet, make a few changes. So there'll be some people with diet restrictions, some people that just want to make positive changes. So for all those people listening, wherever they are in the world, are there any particular apps or tech solutions that you would recommend for those people listening?
Kind of going back to that, the Lose It one or Noom, and I haven't tried out Noom myself, but the Lose It one, you can actually helps you track, you have to input the food and beverage that you eat on a daily basis. So it helps you track your calories. And I have an Apple Watch, and the one thing I love that technology, because it gets me, I have it set that I have to stand up once an hour and move around for a minute, not just stand up. You actually have to get moving. And I love it. Some people, it drives them nuts, but to me, it makes sure that I'm not sitting in this chair, for 12 hours straight and no movement, because sitting is the new smoking, and getting up and moving, and especially during COVID and being, stuck in our houses, just getting up and moving and doing whatever you can is the best.
I completely agree with you, especially on the sitting is the new smoking. And I'm curious, though, as a tech guy, is there a food tech scene or a food tech scene community? And if there is, can you tell me more about how more and more people are turning to tech to make those positive changes?
There is a food tech scene, and one that I'm not too involved in, but I think there's actually... it goes into the manufacture. There's a food tech scene that goes into the manufacturing of food and how it's done. There are a lot of apps out there actually now that can help you track your food waste, which I think is really important. And there actually are some that I have to look these up for you. You can find somebody who, hey, I'm about to throw these vegetables out and I don't want them, or I'm going on vacation and I want to clean out my refrigerator. Who wants these foods? And I think that's a kind of really cool way to not waste your food and share it with someone else. So there's some apps out there that, again, I don't know their names off the top of my head, but that can actually help you share food with others and reduce your food waste or track your food waste, which I think is really important too. Kind of on that note, but not technology wise, is if you've got the time and you are going to go out. This morning, I actually started a batch of fresh vegetable stock, and I took vegetables that were leftovers, like I took the kale stems out, or I took the tops off of my carrots and my beets, and I put them in freezer bags and I freeze them until I get enough. And then I put them in a stock pot with water and I make my own vegetable stock. So it's not an app technology wise, but it is another way to reduce food waste.
And on the topic of food waste there, I was listening to your podcast a couple of days ago, the Eating at a Meeting podcast. I think you interviewed Aidan Riley, and he's doing something very similar, isn't he, around food waste?
He really is. So he and his buddy James, I think they were like elementary school friends, but they were home from college because of COVID-19. Their campuses were closed down, and they saw all these farmers on the news that were throwing away their vegetables and milk. And because of COVID, they had no place to sell it or distribute it. They'd lost their distribution channels. So they called their friends, they called some farmers, they called some food banks, and they created a company called Farm Link Project, which now puts together farmers with food banks. And they went and rented U-Haul trucks and went and picked up the food from the farmers and delivered it directly to the food banks. And 2 college kids were home and thought of this idea. And now in 9 months, because I think they started in April, they have donated over 17 billion pounds of fresh produce to food banks across the United States. And they're showing the impact of food waste because they don't want that food to get retailed and wasted. They're putting it into the hands of people who actually need it because they're going to food banks and don't have the money to buy the food that they need to feed their families. It's really cool.
It is an incredibly cool story. I do urge anyone listening to check that episode out. But on the tech front, are there any particular technology trends that excite you that could further help people with dietary requirements or anything related with food there?
Well, I think going forward, because the meetings industry has been thrown for a loop, we've done a lot of, we're going to a lot of hybrid and a lot of virtual events. So I think the event apps out there that help companies do virtual events or just produce events are going to be at the forefront of helping planners manage food and beverage. Because even thinking food and beverages is a big part of our lives. And I think even having a virtual meeting, people can use apps to send food home to their constituents in their home as well.
And something I also try and do on this Daily Tech podcast is bust any myths and misconceptions that you may encounter in your world. And I'm sure there's going to be more than a few around food allergies and dietary requirements. But is there any observations that you've had in your industry and any misconceptions we can lay to rest once and for all?
Misconceptions probably are that people really don't have food allergies. They're just picky eaters. And that is so not true. There are 32 million Americans in the United States that have true food allergies. There's a podcast that I did early on with Dr. Gupta that talks about the research that she did to really fine tune how many and understand how many people actually have food allergies. And the other myth is like, oh yeah, you can eat that now. It's not going to hurt you. It's not going to harm you. Whether it's celiac disease or fibromyalgia or food allergies, it is going to harm that person. And they are going to miss out on participating in your event because of that. And so the myth about that is that, oh, you're on vacation, you can eat that. That's truly a myth. And it's not something that people want to risk their lives or their health for, right?
Yeah.
And the other myth would be that this is really hard. And it can be hard, but it is easy when you start to look at the food and beverage that you are providing and the ingredients that you are sourcing from and using in your recipes that you're serving. But it does take some work, but it can be done and it can be easy. You just got to do the work in the front end.
And obviously 2020 was an incredibly turbulent year, especially for the events industry and meetings there. So what's next for you and for Thrive Meetings and Events too? And what's going to be your primary focus in 2021?
My primary focus, because we're still doing a lot of virtual events, is my online course, Every Meal Matters. It is launching this month. It's an 8-week course that will, or 8-module course that goes over 10 weeks that will really help you implement and create standard operating procedures across that. So I'll launch that a couple of times throughout the year, but also looking at, how can we still provide food and beverage for events if they're virtual? So having fun with that and thinking of kind of researching the technology that's out there that can provide food and beverage for people, because one of the big struggles that planners have is that maybe Uber Eats and Grubhub, hey, I'm buying Uber Eats and Grubhub coupons for people, but hey, they're not available in my town. So everybody you might have the food, you got what you wanted to eat. I'm stuck. I have nothing to eat because that program that you worked with is not in my town. So looking at solutions for that.
So if anyone would like to find out any more information about your podcast, Thrive Meeting and Events, you've got a course there. There's so much you've got so much going on there, but what's the best way of finding you and actually sending you a message as well if they wanted to carry on this conversation we started today?
Yeah, my website is thrivemeetings.com, and you can actually find the podcast on that website, but you can find the podcast Eating at a Meeting on any podcast platform. You can reach me at hello@thrivemeetings.com. And on social media, the Eating in a Meeting actually has a Facebook group. And also on Instagram, I'm at T Stuckrath, T and then STUCKRATH. And that's where I can be found on Instagram.
Cool. Well, I'll add all those links to the show notes just so people can find you nice and easily. But
Thank you.
No problem. And there's so much I've loved about chatting with you today. Not only your story there and how everything came together, but also talking about technology and dietary requirements, food allergies, food waste, and making positive changes to your diet. These are all big things and possibly things that we never talked or thought about 20 years ago, but now we're making a real impact with that. So thank you so much for sharing all that with me.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, food and beverage is the one thing that we all have to do. We all have to eat, and it is our common ground. And that was from James Beard, a quote from James Beard. And I think it just understanding how we can sit down at an event and share a piece of bread, whether it's gluten-free or not, but just share a meal together can add so much more to our relationships and to our businesses that I think it's a very valuable thing to look at to improve experience.
Wow, how cool is Tracy? It's certainly got me thinking about food, diet, and the impacts tech is having on that. And also, of course, the unique requirements that every person has. And especially if you're hosting a big event, it's no longer acceptable just to put a handful of dishes out there when there are so many people with different needs and requirements, especially if they have food allergies. And as we mentioned there, guest on Tracy's own podcast, which is called Eating at a Meeting, the guests on there are event and meeting planners, doctors, lawyers, farmers, eaters, chefs, human resource managers, and so many more, all sharing their experiences, knowledge, and expertise on how food and beverage is impacting experiences and businesses. So check that out. Let me know what you think. And also let me know your New Year's resolutions and goals for this year. And if you are using Runkeeper, let me know, as I need to get back out there and run off some of these COVID kilos. I've been sat around doing nothing for a couple of weeks, and I need someone to kick my ass and motivate me to keep me running beyond week 3 in January. So please let me know. techblogwriter@outlook.com, my website, techblogwriter.co.uk. Keep those messages coming in. We'll all rock 2020 together. No matter what life throws at us, we'll keep smiling together and try and look on the bright side of things. But I'm afraid that's it for today's episode. I will see you bright and early tomorrow, January the 2nd. We have already got a new guest lined up, ready and waiting. So just a big thank you for listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.